I'm standing in line with my mother, and they kept coming and yelling and screaming and pulling and pushing us apart, and they called age. And I looked at my mother and I told her she was in the wrong line, and they took her into a different line. That's the last I saw of her. When I asked several hours later when I would see my mother, they showed me the smoke. And so the thoughts are, would she have lived if she had stayed with me in my line? Or would she not? Did I send her into a line that went directly to the gas chambers? So these are memories all of us live with.
Memories of a place that was a living hell, Auschwitz. In May 1940, Rudolf Höss, the SS leader of the Sachsenhausen prison camp in Germany, was appointed commander of Auschwitz. He brought along 30 German inmates to perform basic tasks. Then, on June 14, 1940, the Nazis deported 728 Polish prisoners, most of them with the resistance, from the city of Tarnow to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and its history began as soon as those first prisoners arrived. They were treated to a speech by Karl Fritsch, the SS chief in charge of the prisoners, that signaled what Auschwitz would become. "You have come not to a sanatorium, but to a German concentration camp, where the only way out is through the chimney," he said. "If someone doesn't like it, he can throw himself on the barbed wire. If there are Jews in the transport, they don't have the right to live more than 2 weeks. Priests, 1 month, and the others, 3 months.
These men, these Polish political prisoners and German criminals would serve as a source of forced slave labor for, at the time, SS-led construction projects, and then eventually for armament and war-related projects.
Some of the early prisoners were shot, others tortured, and the mortality rate was high. After Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Soviet POWs were sent to Auschwitz. SS Chief Heinrich Himmler drew up plans for its expansion, creating a second large complex at Birkenau, 2 miles away. Living in horrific conditions, most of the Soviet POWs died. That was when Himmler and Höss prepared Auschwitz to play a major role in the final solution for European Jews, the Holocaust. They were transported to Auschwitz from all over occupied Europe.
To me, I can walk this museum all day long. I can talk about it. It's become my second home. But the one thing that I cannot do comfortably to this day is to talk about the boxcar, what happened in the boxcar, and how we came to Auschwitz concentration camp. To this day, I'm in it, I smell it, I hear it, and I feel it.
Newly arrived prisoners were divided in a process known as selection. Children and their mothers and the old and infirm were sent directly to the gas chambers. The young and able-bodied were sent to work.
Auschwitz represents the only camp that served these two functions of both a concentration camp and a killing center. And I think also is the best example and microcosm of this Nazi ideology, of this idea that as you continue to remain useful for us, we will use you. But when you become useless to us, we will kill you. And Auschwitz was the ultimate example of that ideology for the Nazis.
In May 1942, another camp, Bunamanowitz, later called Auschwitz III, became a slave labor camp, supplying workers for the nearby chemical and rubber works of the German conglomerate IG Farben.
We were so hungry, everybody was literally starving in this factory. But the talk was, if we survive, if we survive, who will believe us? Who will live? Who will tell our story? And so they looked around, and I was the youngest. And because I was the youngest, I was chosen to be the messenger. 599 women lined up and gave a crumb of bread, a crumb of bread into my palm to help me survive, allowed me extra rest. In turn, I promised that if I survived, I would be the messenger.
News of Auschwitz's horrors actually began to spread well before the war ended. With the help of Polish resistance groups, a handful of prisoners managed to escape and get word out about the mass killings. 2 shocking eyewitness accounts appeared in 1944. One was written by a former Polish political prisoner, Jerzy Tabo, and circulated by the London-based Polish government in exile. The other was by 2 Slovak Jews, whose detailed descriptions reached Jewish groups and Western governments. Although Allied forces bombed the industrial complex adjacent to Auschwitz, the death camp was left unscathed. As Soviet troops advanced in late 1944 and early 1945, the Nazis fled Auschwitz, taking some 60,000 remaining prisoners with them.
Our factory was emptied, and they brought the men and women together without warm clothes, without shoes. We had clogs on our feet. Some of us had a little blanket that we could put around us, and they marched us out. And they marched us through the fields and through the towns, and they didn't know what to do with us anymore. And we didn't get any food at that point, and most of us were sick, hungry, cold.
On January 27, 1945, Soviet forces reached Auschwitz.
I don't think anyone could have imagined what these Russian soldiers came upon. The conditions of the prisoners, the horrific conditions of the camp, the smell must have been unimaginable. You have to imagine mounds of bodies that in those closing days that the Nazis were not able to either get through the crematoria fast enough or to burn live in the pits that they had created because they were trying so quickly to cover up the evidence in those waning days. You have to imagine coming upon piles and piles of clothing and shoes and eyeglasses and hair and prosthesis and toothbrushes and bowls and suitcases. I have to imagine that it was something that stayed with these men forever in their consciousness.
Between 1.1 and 1.5 million people died at Auschwitz. 90% of them were Jews. The second largest victim group was comprised of Poles, while some 19,000 Gypsies also perished at Auschwitz.
We need to kind of move beyond this idea that history is just a timeline of events and dates and facts, however important those are when we're studying and educating about the Holocaust. But we also have to look at the power of choices that were made, human behavior during that period of time that we can draw parallels to today. What motivated people to become perpetrators and participants in this system of exclusion and discrimination and ultimately the genocide of millions?